Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I'm Kate Moss. I'm a novelist and the biographer, as it were, of CFT. And it's my enormous pleasure to be doing the second of the interviews post-show with some of the extraordinary actors that are leading the companies here. As you all know, most of you have just seen Taken at Midnight, and it's the third of a series of new plays in the Hidden History series, which are designed and commissioned to show an unknown turning point in certain bits of history. And of course, tonight it's the story of Hans Litten and the horrible and dreadful things that were happening before the big story started, is how Mark Hayhurst, the author, put it. So, Penelope Wilton, I've just seen it again, and it actually upset me more seeing you this time than it did last time, because the sense of strength and the idea, particularly when you take the call of you being the one woman surrounded by all those men. When you were offered this role, did you know anything about it? Had you read any of the history? Did you know who she was? How did it all come about?
I didn't know anything about her. I didn't know anything about this story because, as you quite rightly said, it was overshadowed by the much, in numbers, much bigger Holocaust that happened. And of course the Second World War, and this all finished. I mean, Hans had died in 1937. But I was sent the play by Jonathan, and so, of course, I read up a bit about it. But there wasn't an awful lot that I needed to read because it was all in the play. And Mark Hayhurst had done a documentary about the actual trial, because he's a documentary filmmaker. So he'd made a documentary about the actual trial, which was on the television, and I think can still be got on the television, taken from most of the transcripts, not all of them, because not all of them existed, but he pieced together most of the transcripts of the original trial. Of course, they wouldn't be around because the Nazis didn't want their leader to be put into a bad light. So I didn't know about her, but of course I did learn about her afterwards, and she was a remarkable woman. And I think there were probably many remarkable women that we don't know about out there. But this was a very interesting story, and I think it went beyond just this particular story. It's about women who keep the faith. I mean, they're in Argentina and they're in Chile, and at the moment they're in Nigeria, waiting for those poor girls that have been kidnapped and they don't know where they are. The mothers stay because that's what you do. I mean, the fathers do too, but the mothers seem to take a long... it's always the mothers that go on these marches. They will not lose faith. So, and I'm not in any way decrying men at all in this conversation, but the mothers, you have a bond which is completely different, but sort of bond, really, which is described in the play. So I was very fascinated by that. And then I found out about her and how she'd written a book called Beyond Tears in German. And then when she left, she came here with her younger son, and she went round the country giving talks, and went on to the BBC and broadcast about her son and the situation in Germany from the Germans' point of view, from those who didn't want Hitler there. And she was a very brave woman. Her husband went to Northern Ireland. They divorced. They couldn't get over, and the family broke up. The younger son went to Switzerland. He was going to be an actor, but his career was finished. But he had a daughter who now is a very good actress in Germany. And Amgard came here and died in 1955, so she saw them defeated. And her husband didn't. He died in 1940 in Northern Ireland. He went there. So, but they got out. They all got out.
And you obviously have done the research into the family. Did that feel an important way to actually give her a three-dimensional life outside of the relatively small period of time of the play? You're obviously very fascinated by her, to want to know more.
I wanted to know what would happen to her. I mean, the thing was, she was obviously, you know, with a play like this, my view of plays is that it's all there in the text, and I have to find it. You have to mine it. So there are little things that are given away, like she was obviously she was an upper middle class woman. I don't think she was an aristocrat, but she was used, and in that time she was used she was used to a certain way of living and having servants and having a position, being listened to, being heard. And it was incredible that this should be happening in her own country, and she goes to the police and they can't sort it out, and people should do something about it. So definitely all that part of it was what I found in the script, and also her tenacity. She wouldn't leave it alone. She would go on and until it stopped.
And one of the things that is so extraordinary is that we, of course, know, watching it with 21st century eyes, we know that all the things that she says to the SS officer are going to come true. But she is also the embodiment of German motherhood that is about to be venerated. So when you were getting into the scenes that you have, particularly with the SS officer, were you feeling that perhaps he was the sort of son she had expected to have? Because they're very tender to start with. Or was it absolutely all the time that she would do anything to get Hans free?
No, she would do anything. She didn't think twice about the SS officer. That was a way in to her son. The son she had was the son she wanted, the sons she had. She was very proud of her son. He was a very clever man and a very young lawyer. He was only 32 when he died, so he was only about 30 when he put Hitler on the witness stand. And he was sort of brilliant and a free spirit, and he was hopeless in real life. He'd cross a road and get run over practically. He was a man of thought, and he lived with the character I speak about, Margot, who'd got a telephone call, and he lived with Margot and her husband and children in Berlin. And he led a very, very active social and political life. He was a young man. He was just doing what he knew. He didn't think of the danger. He just went in with it. And he did all the things he said he did. He converted to Judaism because after the First World War there was a lot of anti-Semitism, and he thought, I'm going to be on that side. And she was tremendously proud. They were a very, very cultivated family. They were also they were interested in the arts and in music, and as a lot of the people here are. I mean, it's something that was part of their lives.
And of course, you know this theatre well over years. You're the director of the opera, The Seagull, Vita and Virginia. But is it a really special thing to come back here to create a role for the first time, to be in a brand new play?
I think that I can't tell you what a joy it is to be in a new play. I mean, a new play happens very rarely now in my life because young writers, Mark isn't that young, but often the writers are young. They don't write parts from my age, partly because, quite rightly, they probably don't know anything about middle-aged women, apart from their mothers. Or they write rather sort of stereotyped sort of people. And this was such a wonderful role because Mark seemed to understand. So he made it so rounded, the character, and it touched a lot of things. It was, as I said earlier, it's not just about this particular case. It's about women in general, and mothers. And if you have children, and I do, it resonates. It was like a bell going off. I could hear it. And it made complete sense to me. He seems to have got it right. So to do a new play now in this theatre was extraordinarily lucky. In fact, actually, director of the opera was the first time it had been done in this country. And Vita and Virginia, which I did with Eileen, was her adaptation of the letters. So that was the first one. So I've been very lucky. I've done 3 new plays here.
And one of the things Mark said when we were having a chat was that he couldn't get Irmgard out of his mind. So he had made the 2 documentaries, and he kept thinking of all the women in history that didn't appear. And then he tried to work out how to do it and whether there should be lots of women in the play, but in the end realised it could only be her, because that was the story. And I think everybody watching you just felt the power of that. I mean, it was extraordinary to watch. But is it really draining playing a role like this? Because across the way there's Gypsy and there's been Guys and Dolls, and every night people are smiling and cheering. And then in here you could hear the gasps at certain moments. So how do you as an actor keep your strength, I suppose?
Well, you don't do an awful lot else. I have to admit, I don't do a great deal more than this play. And it's rather nice being away from home because I have nothing, I've escaped. So my real life is in London. But here, I don't have, well, I've forgotten about London for the moment. And so I just have to look after myself because there are a lot of other people in London who ask for me for things and have to do a normal life. But here, it's quite a selfish life. I do this play and that's what I do. It is quite tiring, especially when you do 2 shows a day. But I have a wonderful cast. I can't tell you that nobody does a play by themselves. I have a great writer who has given me this platform, and it's a wonderful platform. And then I have this tremendous cast around me, and a wonderful son, and the Conrad, and my husband, and the other prisoners. I can't tell you what a joy it has been working with this particular cast. They have been, and I've had Jonathan, and all the things, you know, that give you a feeling for something, like the lighting and the costumes. And the costumes are sort of brilliant because they look lived in, and they're not a big wardrobe, so it's like a sort of, all these things add to what you're doing. So I'm not alone.
And the music as well.
And the music is wonderful.
It's sort of like nails down a board.
It's awful, awful. And then that wonderful Bach, which is so ironic at the end, which is all about peace and love.
But with you've obviously at the moment, I mean, many people here will have been watching you on the big screen and the small screen as well. Does it feel like a coming home to be in theatre? Or do you actually feel each role you take as the invitation it is? You like doing all
Well,
of
I
these
do that. Every role I take is an invitation, but I have spent most of my life in the theatre. So this is the place where I'm most at home, really, because that's where I've been for 46 years, or however long it is. And I have done films and television along the way, but my interest is in language, and in this particular media. Theatre is something which is so very unique and very difficult. It asks an enormous amount of a performer, of an actor. So it's always challenging. Sometimes I don't know why I do it, because it seems an impossible task, but I'm always pleased when I get to the top of the hill.
Because the monologues here, they're almost Shakespearean for you, aren't they, for your character? They're huge, great big chunks of text with nobody else there to save you if something happens. No. And is that an exciting challenge, or when you got the script, did you think, blimey?
Well, I did think blimey, but I also, if something is very well written, it has a rhythm, and it has the language that is very easy to say. It's not an easy subject, but the language has a rhythm, and a good writing always has that. When you do things in translation, like if you do Chekhov in translation, if you do it by a good writer, if say a great writer does the translation, it is always easier, and you actually are doing their view of the great play. And it's the same with this. If you have, it has its own rhythm. So you have to remember that, and you have to be true to that. So you get every word right. Mark was rather amazed because he's done a lot of documentary filmmaking and working with film people who don't have such a, they don't care so much about the words. So they say, oh, we'll cut this, we'll do this, da-da. Actors really care about the words because it's their only thing. We don't have scenes, we don't have backing, we don't have wonderful special effects. There's just us, and we can say, oh, it's cold, and rub ourselves, and then we're cold. But if the language, we really respect the language. And Mark was very interested in that because this is his first play. And language is terribly important, and the way one word out can throw the rhythm of a sentence is very important. So all that has gone into in great detail. Mm-hmm.
And when he was talking about writing the play, he was talking about that sense of responsibility, about if you take real history and make an entertainment out of it, the sense that you must be responsible to the truth of the history. Did you all as a company talk about the broader picture as a group, or did you actually focus entirely on the text that you had in front of you?
No, we have, in every good rehearsal time, we have photographs of what was going on. So we had photographs of Vestervägen and Sonnenborg, and some of the tortures that they did to the people. We had the stormtroopers. We had a documentary on the wall, really, of different things to tell us what was happening. And also the sort of middle-class life that these people were living. So, it is true, she says at the end, she says, it is possible to live in Germany now. It is possible. After all, most of the people in those concentration camps have in one way or another chosen to be there. Well, that was the view a lot of Germans. If you didn't join in, life could be lovely. You could go to the Tiergarten. It was perfectly fine. If you didn't care for Jews much, that was probably better. But, that's life was going on. It wasn't we weren't in a war situation. 1936, they had the Olympic Games in Berlin. So there was, and it was, we were all for appeasement. So we didn't want to have another war. So this expansionism that was going on, and it was all down to the Versailles Treaty, really. People, I do say at one point, and where would Mr. Hitler be without the Versailles Treaty? But it was such a very, very unfair in many ways settlement on Germany that this enormous resentment was allowed to flourish and grow, and that's what happened.
And with the way that you rehearse something like this, did you find yourself changing your idea of how you were going to play her as the rehearsal went on and you met your family in the cast? Or is she actually the person you imagined when you first read that script and thought, I'm going to be her?
No, I couldn't see her immediately because I'm not quite as forceful as Irmgard as a person. But if push comes to shove and your child is in any way threatened, suddenly you turn into something else. I've done that myself. You safeguard your own. So you draw upon that. And also you have to remember that she was a woman of her time too. So she was used to a certain amount of deference by people who weren't quite the same class as herself. So she thought she could, in her own way, we would call it bullying herself, but she says, I made myself objectionable to some of his staff. So she got in to see him through a sort of raising the stakes a bit and saying, come on, I've got to see this man, Somebody who was more sort of muted or didn't have such a strong personality probably wouldn't have got to see the people that she wanted to see.
Yeah. So you used the text that Mark had given to call out.
Yes.
Now, obviously, you're here and you're enjoying this, and the run has been going wonderfully. It's one of those questions as a writer I always feel guilty asking. But with notices and reviews, do you read them? Do you feel, as the leader of the company, responsible for either supporting the writer or the other members of cast? How do you let that make you happy but not get in the way of a performance?
Well, I have to say quite honestly that many years ago, I stopped reading reviews because, for a start, if people say whatever they say about you, it makes you slightly self-conscious. And for a moment, it makes you self-conscious. And actually, it's just that person's point of view. I'm very pleased when I hear from my agent that we're going to run for a bit, because that's what you want to hear. That's what reviews do. You're either on or you're off. So you hopefully that people will be sitting here. I wasn't entirely convinced. I said to Jonathan when we started this play, I said, let's do it without an interval, because they'll all leave in the interval. Because it's too depressing. I thought they won't stay. And actually, he was even thinking of doing that. Because I'd so convinced him. I said, it's such a sad story, people won't stay. But he convinced me that probably they would. And luckily you did.
But spent a lot of money at the bar,
yes,
stiff drink,
exactly,
you see.
I know, but that was denying them that, so they were thinking about it. So I worked quite hard on that for a while, but I don't read reviews because, and that's not just out of sort of, it's not really worth it. I mean, also, quite a lot of the reviewers now are people who, you can get reviews now on the social media and in so many other ways now, that the reviewer has rather lost his bite now. So they're not putting really first-class people into those positions. Michael Billington is someone I really admire, and there are one or two more. But really, if you do politics and cooking as well, I don't see what they can say about the theatre.
Yes, they got rid of all the book people at the Times. So you'll be interviewed, and the interview will be, so tell me about your book. And you go, you haven't read it, have you? Yeah. No, it's exactly that. But you're obviously, at the same time, having great fun in other spheres. So what are the real delights of the last couple of years for you as an actor? Because you seem to have been doing some really wonderful things, as well as this amazing play here.
Well, of course, I've been doing Downton Abbey, which has been a joy, because it's so amusing, and it's so wonderful that people like it so much, and many people do. And I've never been in anything that successful. I mean, I've gone to these sort of theatres and done to a small audience, and suddenly, there's an enormous audience who really enjoy they enjoy the whole thing, but they really enjoy me and Maggie going at one another, which is great fun, and we have an enormous amount of enjoyment doing that. And then and then recently I've been doing these. I've just done a second Best Exotic Marigold Hotel film too, so that has been very, very amusing. And also it is very nice, because when I started my career I did comedy, and at the National I did a lot of comedy, and I would so I get a chance to do a bit of comedy. I wish I could do it in the theatre now. People write such. There doesn't seem to be anything here for me at the moment as far as comedy is concerned. I told Jonathan, find me a comedy, because I can make people laugh as well.
Well, we're recording this, of course, so it will be evident. But actually, it's a very interesting point. Right at the beginning, you made the comment about actresses middle-aged and more, and there being fewer roles written. But at the same time, there seems to be in television and film actually a real delight amongst filmmakers about actresses, the great actresses of our time having these roles. Yes. So do you think it just means that the playwright should get their finger out? There should be more...
Well, yes, like Mark, I think. Yeah. Funnily enough, I think the Best Exotic Marigold started it, a few years ago. And suddenly there was... they saw there was life in the old dog yet. And, these people, life doesn't just stop when you get to a certain age. You have all the same feelings, and you want to have all the same excitements in your life. You just do it just a tiny bit slower than you did before.
And what is either your next project, if you're prepared to say, or what would you like to do next?
Well, I've never made a plan, because they're always thwarted. It's a bit like decorating. If you go out for one wallpaper, you'll never find it. I always go and think, well, that'll be nice, and then choose it, because I can never, I can't go on looking. So I've never done that. What I always go for is the words, because if I don't have the good words, then I can't do it. I have to have the good script, because if I don't have a good script or a good story, then I don't have the tools with which I can work. I can't turn something into something wonderful if it's not there originally. I'm not that clever. I am the person who interprets what a writer has done. I have great, great respect for the writer. The writer, to me, has created it, and I interpret it, and I hopefully do as near as damn it to what he wants. So I always look for that. And what I'm doing next is I'm doing another Downton, and then the second Best Exotic Hotel comes out in February of next year. And then who knows?
Well, there we are. That's an offer for anybody watching. Well, what we agreed, ladies and gentlemen, was obviously the company is having an extraordinary run. 2 shows yesterday, show tonight. The glass of wine is now empty. And that is the cue to say thank you to you, to say that we will be back doing, I'll be back doing an interview with Imelda Staunton on the 3rd, Late with Kate with Imelda. There is a post-show on the 30th of October for Gypsy Across the Way, and it's very much the same drill as you know, that you don't have to have gone to that performance, but you do need to get a ticket to come in. But I think it's been extraordinary that you have given a little bit extra at the end of this performance. It is
it's a delight.
It is an amazing thing.